the strange thing wasn't that the reactor failed. It was that everyone already knew who would be left behind when it did. The warning sirens began as a low metallic hum beneath the floor, almost lost beneath the constant vibration of Titan Reactor Station 7. Then the sound grew louder, sharper. Red emergency lights flashed across steel walls stained by decades of heat and maintenance work. Ethan Walker looked up from the diagnostic panel in front of him and immediately felt the knot tighten in his stomach. Around him, workers abandoned tools, sealed equipment lockers, and hurried toward the evacuation corridors. Nobody needed instructions. Nobody asked questions. They had practiced this drill too many times. The giant fusion core buried beneath the station groaned like a living thing waking from a nightmare. The floor trembled beneath Ethan's boots. Overhead speakers crackled with static before a calm, computerized voice filled the chamber. Emergency condition detected. Reactor instability at level 4. Mandatory evacuation in effect. Proceed to designated exits immediately. Ethan grabbed his work jacket and joined the stream of workers moving through the maintenance deck. Hot air rushed through the corridor vents. Somewhere deep below, pressure valves released with thunderous bursts that echoed through the station. Every few seconds the lights flickered. Faces passed him in hurried silence. Nobody looked at anyone else. Nobody wanted to be the last person standing when a reactor decided to remind everyone how small they really were. As Ethan approached Junction C, something caught his attention. A maintenance cart sat overturned beside a sealed service tunnel. Tools were scattered across the floor. One of the wheels still spun slowly. He frowned. The evacuation route should have been empty by now. Then he noticed something else. A faint trail of blue coolant smeared across the metal deck. Fresh. His eyes followed it toward the dark service corridor. The flow of workers continued around him. Boots pounded against steel. Emergency strobes painted everything in flashes of crimson. Yet somehow nobody seemed to notice. Or maybe they did. Maybe they simply chose not to look. Ethan stepped closer. The station shook again. Harder this time. A support beam groaned overhead. Then he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A weak metallic sound coming from somewhere beyond the service tunnel. Ethan froze. For a moment he thought he imagined it. Then it came again. 3 slow knocks. Barely audible beneath the alarms. Someone was still inside. He looked back toward the evacuation corridor. Hundreds of workers were already disappearing toward the shuttle bays. Safety doors would begin sealing in minutes. Anyone left behind would become the station's problem instead of the company's responsibility. Ethan knew how these things worked. Everyone did. Another tremor rolled through the structure. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The computerized voice repeated its warning. Mandatory evacuation. Immediate compliance required. Then a pair of supervisors hurried past him. One glanced toward the service tunnel and quickly looked away. The expression on his face told Ethan everything. Somebody already knew who was in there. Somebody had already decided not to stop. Ethan turned toward the darkness beyond the tunnel entrance. The tapping had stopped. Only the distant growl of the unstable reactor remained. For several seconds, he stood completely still. Then he slowly removed the evacuation tag clipped to his jacket. The crowded corridor continued moving towards safety without him. Ethan Walker watched them go, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he took a single step in the opposite direction. The service tunnel swallowed the sounds of the evacuation almost immediately. Ethan moved deeper into the darkness with a flashlight in one hand and a portable scanner in the other. The air felt hotter here. Every breath carried the faint metallic smell of overheated machinery. Condensation dripped from pipes running along the ceiling. Somewhere ahead, cooling systems struggled against the growing instability spreading through the reactor complex. His scanner displayed warning after warning across the screen. Radiation levels rising. Structural stress increasing. Recommended evacuation. Ethan ignored them all. He had spent 15 years repairing things that other people wanted to abandon. Machines. Systems. Sometimes entire sections of the station. He never expected that one day the thing being abandoned would be a person. Another tremor rolled through the corridor. A loose panel clattered onto the floor several yards away. Ethan stopped and listened. For a moment, there was nothing except the hum of distant machinery. Then he heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Weak. Slower now. He followed the sound around a corner and into a narrow maintenance chamber illuminated by flickering emergency lights. The room looked as though a storm had passed through it. Equipment cases lay scattered across the floor. Diagnostic screens flashed error messages in alien script and standard station code. A support frame had partially collapsed near the far wall. That was where he saw her. The alien woman sat trapped beneath a twisted section of maintenance scaffolding. Blue coolant stained the floor around her. One sleeve of her station uniform had been torn during the collapse. Dust covered her silver hair. Her violet eyes lifted toward him the instant his flashlight crossed the room. For a second, neither of them spoke. She looked surprised. Not relieved. Not grateful. Just surprised. As though she had already accepted that nobody was coming. Ethan slowly approached and knelt beside the damaged framework. "You are still here," she said quietly. Her voice sounded strained but steady. "Looks that way," Ethan replied. He examined the support beam pinning part of the structure in place. "Can you move?" She gave a small shake of her head. "Not enough." Another tremor rattled the chamber. The lights dimmed before flickering back to life. Ethan checked the beam. Heavy, but not impossible. The real problem was stability. Move it wrong, and the entire frame could collapse further. The woman watched him studying the damage. "You should leave," she said. "The evacuation window is closing." Ethan almost laughed. It was exactly the kind of thing someone would say after being left behind. "Funny," he said. "I was about to tell you the same thing." For the first time, something almost resembling a smile touched the corner of her mouth. Then it vanished. "Hey!" Loud warning tone echoed through the corridor outside. Station lockdown initiating in 12 minutes. Ethan's scanner confirmed it. Once the emergency bulkhead sealed, entire sections of the reactor would become isolated. Rescue teams would not be able to reach them until the crisis ended. If it ended, Ethan pulled a compact hydraulic jack from his tool pack. "What is your name?" she asked. He positioned the device beneath the beam. "Ethan Walker." "Lyra Voss." The name lingered in the air between them. Ethan activated the jack. The machine hummed as pressure built. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the twisted metal frame began to lift. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Warning lights flashed red across Lyra's face. She watched him work in silence. Finally, she spoke again. "Why did you come back?" Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. He thought about the supervisors who had looked away, the workers who kept walking, the empty corridor, the sound of 3 faint knocks in the dark. "Because somebody should have," he said. For several seconds, Lyra said nothing. Then she lowered her eyes. And for the first time since he entered the chamber, Ethan noticed that she looked less afraid of the reactor than she did of being left alone. The hydraulic jack groaned under the weight. Ethan watched the pressure gauge climb 1 mark at a time while the twisted framework slowly rose another inch. Sweat ran down the back of his neck despite the cooling system in his work jacket. The temperature inside the maintenance chamber continued to climb as reactor instability spread through the station. Above them, emergency lights pulsed like a heartbeat. Red. Dark. Red again. Lyra remained remarkably calm. Her breathing was controlled. Her eyes followed every movement Ethan made as though she were memorizing them. Most people panicked when alarms started screaming. Most people looked for someone else to blame. She did neither. 3 more inches, Ethan muttered. Maybe 4. The beam shifted slightly. A sharp metallic creak echoed through the chamber. Both of them froze. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, a heavy bulkhead door slammed shut. The station lockdown had begun. Ethan checked the timer on his scanner. 11 minutes ago, they still had options. Now entire sections of Titan Reactor Station 7 were sealing themselves off to contain the emergency. Their path back to the shuttle bays was already gone. Lyra noticed the expression on his face. "The exits?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Gone." She absorbed the information without visible surprise, almost as if she expected bad news. "Then you should stop lifting that beam." Ethan glanced at her. "That is not happening. If we are trapped either way, conserving your strength would be the logical choice." Good thing I have never been accused of being logical. To his surprise, another faint smile appeared. It lasted only a second before fading. The beam rose another inch. "Enough." Ethan crouched beside her. "I need you to try moving now." Lyra nodded. Slowly she shifted her weight. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face, but after several careful seconds, she managed to slide free from the damaged structure. Ethan immediately lowered the jack before the unstable frame could collapse. The moment the pressure released, metal settled with a deep groan. He offered his hand. Lyra stared at it for a moment before accepting. Her fingers were cool despite the heat surrounding them. Ethan helped her stand. She managed it for only a few seconds before her balance wavered. He steadied her without comment. Can you walk? He asked. A little. Then a little is enough. Another station-wide warning echoed through hidden speakers. Critical reactor status. Personnel advised to seek reinforced shelter immediately. Ethan looked toward the corridor. The maintenance chamber was no longer safe. Neither was any place near the primary reactor. They needed somewhere shielded. Somewhere built to survive the kind of emergency nobody ever expected to happen. His scanner displayed a nearby location. Auxiliary maintenance bunker. 400 yards away through the lower service tunnels. Ethan pointed toward the map. That is our destination. Lyra studied the screen. Those tunnels run beneath the reactor housing. I noticed. The radiation levels are rising. I noticed that too. For a second, she simply looked at him. Then she shook her head softly. Human workers are very strange. Ethan adjusted his flashlight and offered a tired grin. You are not the first person to tell me that. Together, they stepped into the corridor. Behind them, the abandoned chamber disappeared into darkness. Ahead lay a maze of maintenance tunnels glowing with emergency lights and uncertainty. The reactor continued to rumble somewhere deep beneath their feet. But for the first time since entering the service sector, Ethan noticed something had changed. The station no longer felt empty. He was not walking into the dark alone. The tunnel narrowed as they moved deeper beneath the station. Pipes lined both walls, wrapped in layers of insulation stained by years of heat and maintenance work. Emergency lights cast long red reflections across the metal floor. Every few minutes, the structure trembled softly beneath their feet, reminding them that an unstable fusion core was operating somewhere beyond the layers of steel surrounding them. Ethan adjusted the flashlight beam and checked the scanner clipped to his belt. Radiation levels continued to rise, but the auxiliary maintenance bunker remained reachable. 400 yards had become 300, then 250. Progress felt slow. Lyra walked beside him carefully. She refused to complain despite the obvious strain of keeping pace. More than once Ethan noticed her favoring one leg, but whenever he looked her way, she straightened and continued moving. Finally, they reached a heavy service hatch built into the tunnel wall. The reinforced door stood slightly open. A green emergency indicator glowed above the frame. Ethan exhaled in relief. Looks like we found our shelter. Together they stepped inside. The bunker was small but sturdy. Thick concrete composite walls surrounded a room filled with old maintenance equipment, emergency supplies, and backup power systems. Dust covered most surfaces. The station had clearly not expected anyone to use this place for years. Yet the air felt cooler here. Quieter. Safer. Ethan sealed the hatch behind them and listened as the locking mechanisms engaged with a satisfying metallic click. For the first time since entering the service tunnels, the reactor's distant rumble felt muted. Not gone, just farther away. He dropped his tool pack onto a workbench and activated the room's backup lights. Soft white illumination replaced the flashing red emergency glow. The sudden change made the bunker feel almost peaceful. Lyra lowered herself onto a storage crate near the wall. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt strange after hours of alarms and warnings. Ethan opened an emergency supply cabinet and found water pouches along with a sealed medical kit. He carried both over and offered one of the water packs. Lyra accepted it with a quiet nod. Thank you. Ethan sat on a crate opposite her. You are welcome. The water disappeared quickly. Only then did Ethan notice how exhausted she looked. The silver strands of her hair were still coated with dust. Small scratches marked her uniform sleeves. Yet the thing that stood out most was not physical. It was the look in her eyes. A kind of weariness that seemed older than the accident. Older than the station itself. Lyra noticed him studying her. What? She asked. Ethan shrugged. You do not seem surprised by any of this. She looked down at the water pouch in her hands. Which part? The reactor failure. Being left behind. The station falling apart. For several seconds, she said nothing. The backup generators hummed softly in the background. Finally, she spoke. When people stop listening, surprises become rare. Ethan frowned. That sounds specific. A faint smile touched her face. Not happy. Just tired. Maybe it is. Before he could ask another question, his scanner emitted a soft alert tone. Ethan checked the display. The station network was still partially functional. A handful of emergency channels remained active. Most showed evacuation reports and damage assessments. One entry caught his attention. Maintenance technician Lyra Voss. Status unknown. Pending casualty designation. Ethan looked up. They already listed you as missing. Lyra stared at the screen for a moment. Then she looked away. That was fast. Ethan expected anger, maybe frustration. Instead, he heard something worse: resignation. As though this was exactly what she expected people to do. The bunker fell silent again. Beyond the reinforced walls, the reactor continued its distant mechanical heartbeat. But now another question had settled into Ethan's mind. He had come back because someone needed help. Yet the longer he sat across from Lyra Voss, the more he began to suspect the accident was only part of the story. The bunker clock showed that only 43 minutes had passed since the first evacuation alarm. To Ethan, it felt like half a day. The station outside continued to groan and settle as automated systems fought to contain the reactor instability. Every so often a vibration traveled through the floor beneath their boots, followed by the distant hiss of pressure regulators cycling somewhere in the depths of the facility. Ethan sat beside a maintenance console, slowly working through the emergency network logs still available on the station grid. Most records were locked behind administrative permissions. A few remained accessible. Damage reports, personnel manifests, evacuation routes. None of them explained why a capable technician had been left in a collapsing maintenance sector. Across the room, Lyra stared quietly at the white wall opposite her. She had barely touched the second water pouch Ethan offered. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt heavy, like something waiting to be said. Finally, Ethan lowered the scanner. "You knew nobody was coming for you." Lyra did not answer immediately. The backup generator hummed softly overhead. "I suspected. That is not the same thing." She looked down at her hands. "No, it is not." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Why?" For several seconds, she remained silent. Then she released a long breath. 6 months ago, I filed a safety report." Ethan waited. "A serious one?" "Serious enough." Her eyes drifted toward the sealed hatch. The reactor inspections were being altered. Maintenance schedules were skipped. Critical components were certified without being tested. Ethan frowned. Even a worker on the lowest level understood how dangerous that could become. Titan reactor station powered 3 orbital settlements and supplied energy to millions of people. Safety procedures existed for a reason. "You reported it?" he asked. Lyra nodded. 3 times. "What happened?" A bitter smile appeared. "Nothing. At first." She stood slowly and walked toward the dim observation screen mounted on the wall. The display showed a static image of the station exterior drifting against the stars. Then meetings stopped appearing on my schedule. Promotions disappeared. Friends became distant. Ethan knew that pattern. Every large organization had its own version of it. Nobody punished you directly. They simply made life smaller until you learned to stay quiet. And you kept pushing. Lyra gave a soft laugh. "Apparently that was my mistake." Ethan studied her expression. There was no self-pity there. Only disappointment. Not in herself. In other people. "You think the accident was connected?" She turned toward him. "Do you?" The question lingered in the room. Ethan remembered the supervisors who avoided the service tunnel. The casualty report issued far too quickly. The strange certainty in Lyra's voice from the moment he found her. Piece by piece, the picture was becoming harder to ignore. Before he could respond, an alert flashed across the maintenance console. Both of them looked toward the screen. A small network relay had briefly reconnected to the station archives. Only for a few seconds. Then it vanished again. Yet during that brief moment, a hidden file appeared in the system logs. Ethan opened it. The screen displayed a single line. Maintenance Sector 12 Surveillance Archive. Access removed by executive authorization. Timestamp: 2 hours before reactor failure. Neither of them spoke. The words glowed quietly on the monitor. Outside, the reactor continued its distant mechanical heartbeat. Inside the bunker, Ethan felt something shift. He had entered the service tunnel to save a stranded worker. Now he was beginning to understand that Lyra Voss had never been the real problem. She had simply noticed one. The file remained on the screen long after the connection vanished. Ethan stared at the authorization record while the bunker's quiet hum filled the room. Someone with executive access had removed surveillance footage from the exact sector where the reactor incident began. Not after the emergency. Before it. Nearly 2 hours before the first alarm sounded. That detail settled heavily in his mind. Accidents did not usually arrive with paperwork prepared in advance. Lyra moved closer to the console. The pale light from the monitor reflected in her violet eyes. "That archive should not have been touched," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "That is what worries me." He opened the station maintenance map and traced the network routes feeding through the lower levels. Most channels were dead. A few emergency relays still flickered online for seconds at a time before disappearing again. Somewhere inside the crippled station, data still existed. The challenge was reaching it. Another tremor rolled through the bunker. A storage cabinet rattled against the wall. Dust drifted from an overhead vent. The reactor status display immediately updated. Containment system stable. Core fluctuations increasing. Ethan did not like the combination. Stable for now often meant unstable later. He leaned closer to the terminal. If that footage still exists, there has to be a backup. Lyra folded her arms. There is. Ethan looked up. You know where. I designed part of the maintenance archive network. For the first time since meeting her, Ethan saw something other than exhaustion in her expression. Confidence. Professional pride. Every surveillance system automatically mirrors critical recordings to an isolated storage node beneath the engineering sector. Ethan blinked. You never mentioned that. You never asked. Despite everything happening around them, a faint smile appeared on his face. Fair point. Lyra stepped beside him and activated another map layer. A hidden route appeared beneath the main station schematics. Narrow service corridors. Utility shafts. Maintenance access points. One location blinked in yellow. Archive Node 9. Ethan studied the distance. About 600 yards from here. Through sealed engineering tunnels. Which means nobody else can reach it. Lyra nodded. Unless they already have. Silence settled between them. They both understood the implication. If someone had removed evidence before the reactor failure, there was every reason to believe they would try to erase whatever remained. Ethan checked the emergency channels again. Most messages focused on evacuation logistics and damage control. Then a new transmission briefly appeared. Internal Priority Directive. All personnel are prohibited from accessing engineering archive systems during emergency operations. The message vanished almost immediately. Ethan exchanged a look with Lyra. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The warning answered more questions than it created. Outside the bunker, the reactor groaned through layers of reinforced walls. Somewhere above them, executives, supervisors, and emergency coordinators were trying to control a crisis. Yet someone seemed remarkably concerned about a collection of recordings. Ethan shut down the terminal and stood. I spent 15 years fixing broken equipment, he said. Whenever somebody told me not to open a panel, that was usually the first panel worth opening. Lyra stared at him for a moment before a genuine smile appeared. Small, tired, real. Human workers are definitely strange. Ethan grabbed his tool pack and secured the flashlight to his belt. Beyond the sealed hatch, dark tunnels stretched beneath the station like veins beneath steel skin. Somewhere inside them waited answers. Maybe proof. Maybe nothing at all. But for the first time since the alarms began, Ethan felt certain about one thing. Lyra had not been abandoned because she was unimportant. She had been abandoned because she knew something valuable. The bunker hatch opened with a reluctant metallic sigh. A wave of warmer air drifted inside from the engineering tunnels beyond. Ethan adjusted the strap on his tool pack and stepped into the corridor first. Lyra followed a few feet behind. The emergency lights here glowed amber instead of red, casting long shadows across pipes and maintenance conduits that stretched into the distance. The deeper levels of the station felt different from the upper sectors. Quieter, more isolated, as if the rest of the evacuation had happened. In another world, their footsteps echoed softly against the steel floor. Every few yards, Ethan checked the route displayed on his scanner. Archive Node 9 remained active. That alone surprised him. If someone truly wanted those recordings erased, the storage system should have disappeared hours ago, unless they assumed nobody could reach it, or nobody would try. Another tremor rolled through the station. This one felt stronger. Overhead lights flickered before stabilizing again. A warning indicator flashed briefly on Ethan's scanner. Reactor fluctuation increasing. Estimated containment margin reduced by 6%. He did not like the trend. How much farther, he asked. Lyra studied the map. Less than 300 yards. They continued through a narrow access passage lined with sealed equipment lockers. Dust coated most surfaces. Some doors carried inspection stickers dated years earlier. Ethan found himself wondering how many forgotten systems kept the station alive every day without anyone noticing. Human workers, alien engineers, maintenance crews, thousands of ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. Yet somehow one hidden decision made by a few powerful individuals could place all of them at risk. The thought lingered as they approached a reinforced security checkpoint. The gate stood closed across the corridor. Ethan examined the control panel. No power. No response. Great, he muttered. Lyra stepped closer. Move aside. She knelt beside an access plate and removed it using a small maintenance tool from her pocket. Several wires and optical connectors became visible. Ethan watched as her fingers moved confidently through the circuitry. You really did help design this network. Part of it. A few seconds later, the checkpoint lights flickered green. The gates slowly slid open. Ethan stared at her. You know, most people would have mentioned that skill earlier. Most people would have asked earlier. He laughed despite everything. The sound felt strange in the silent corridor. Almost normal. They passed through the checkpoint and entered a circular engineering junction. At its center stood a tall data relay tower covered in blinking status indicators. Archive Node 9. Relief washed across Ethan's face. They had made it. But as he approached the terminal, his scanner emitted a sharp alert tone. An incoming transmission appeared on the display. Not public. Not emergency broadcast. Direct. Ethan opened it. A single message filled the screen. Leave the archive alone. Evacuation rescue will be dispatched immediately. Lyra froze beside him. Ethan read the message again. No sender identification. No department signature. Just those words. Rescue in exchange for silence. The reactor rumbled somewhere far below. The blinking relay lights reflected across the polished floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan reached forward and placed his hand on the archive terminal. Funny thing, he said quietly. I was never very good at accepting deals from people who abandoned their own workers. Beside him, Lyra looked at the message one last time before the screen faded. Whatever waited inside Archive Node 9, someone was afraid of it. And that meant they were finally standing in front of the truth. The archive terminal came alive beneath Ethan's hand. Layers of encrypted directories unfolded across the screen. Most required executive authorization. Lyra bypassed them with the confidence of someone who understood the system better than the people who managed it. One folder remained untouched. Emergency Surveillance Mirror. Last modified 2 hours before reactor failure. Neither of them spoke as the first recording opened. Grainy security footage filled the display. Maintenance Sector 12 appeared exactly as Ethan remembered it. Workers moved between diagnostic stations. Engineers reviewed inspection reports. Nothing seemed unusual. Then the timestamp advanced. A group of senior administrators entered the sector accompanied by private contractors wearing unmarked uniforms. Ethan leaned closer. One contractor accessed a reactor control junction normally restricted during active operations. Another disconnected several monitoring systems. The footage continued. No accident. No random malfunction. Step by step, critical safeguards were deliberately taken offline. The room felt colder despite the heat radiating through the station. They did it themselves, Ethan said quietly. Lyra nodded once. Her expression carried no satisfaction. Only sadness. I knew something was wrong. I did not know it was this bad. More recordings followed. Internal meetings. Maintenance reports. Safety warnings marked as resolved without being reviewed. Then another file appeared. This one carried a classification level higher than anything else in the archive. Lyra opened it. A holographic document expanded across the screen. Ethan read the heading twice before he fully understood it. Titan Reactor Station Cost Reduction Initiative. Beneath it sat projections showing enormous financial savings generated by delaying inspections and replacing experienced technicians with temporary contractors. Every risk had been calculated. Every warning assigned a monetary value. Human lives. Alien lives. Entire colonies. Reduced to percentages inside a spreadsheet. Ethan stared at the figures in silence. He had spent 15 years crawling through maintenance shafts and repairing systems most executives would never see. He knew how difficult honest work could be. What he did not understand was how someone could look at all those names and see only numbers. Lyra suddenly pointed toward the corner of the document. There. Ethan followed her finger. A signature block occupied the bottom of the page. Multiple names appeared beneath the authorization records. Then his eyes stopped on the final entry. Chairman Arlen Voss. Ethan slowly turned toward her. The room became very quiet. Even the hum of the archive systems seemed distant. Lyra looked at the signature for several seconds before speaking. My father. Ethan said nothing. She folded her arms and stared at the screen. Now you understand why nobody wanted me talking. The words carried no anger. Somehow that made them heavier. Ethan thought back to the evacuation corridor. The supervisors who looked away. The casualty report issued before anyone searched for survivors. It all made sense now. She had not been abandoned because she was powerless. She had been abandoned because she was connected to the one person capable of exposing everything. The archive terminal emitted another alert. A communications relay had briefly reconnected to the wider network. Ethan looked at the transmission options. For the first time since entering the station, they had a path outward. Not for long. Maybe only a few minutes. Maybe less. Lyra met his eyes across the glow of the monitor. Neither needed to explain what came next. The evidence existed. The connection existed. And somewhere above them, people who believed the truth had disappeared forever were about to learn how wrong they had been. The communications relay remained active for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Ethan knew because he watched the countdown timer shrink second by second while data streamed from Archive Node 9 into every emergency channel still functioning across the station network. Maintenance reports, inspection records, surveillance footage, authorization signatures. Thousands of files left the archive in a silent flood of evidence. Nobody spoke while it happened. There was nothing left to say. The truth was finally moving on its own. Then the relay disconnected. The screen went dark. The archive chamber fell silent except for the distant hum of machinery and the steady pulse of emergency lighting. For a moment, Ethan wondered if it had been enough. Then his scanner began receiving notifications. One after another. Priority investigations initiated. Executive accounts suspended. Emergency oversight authorities requesting access. Independent safety boards acknowledging receipt of evidence. The messages arrived faster than he could read them. Somewhere above, people were discovering what had been hidden. And for the first time since the alarms began, the station no longer felt controlled by the same individuals who had abandoned it. Lyra stood motionless beside the terminal. Her eyes remained fixed on the final transmission log. Ethan could not tell what she was thinking. Relief. Grief. Maybe both. It is done, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Looks that way. Another notification appeared. Emergency rescue teams had entered the engineering sectors. Multiple survivor searches underway. Estimated arrival, 27 minutes. Ethan sat down on a nearby equipment crate and released a long breath he had been carrying for hours. The exhaustion hit him all at once. The heat, the alarms, the tunnels, everything. Across the room, Lyra finally looked away from the screen. You could have left when everyone else did. Ethan smiled faintly. You mentioned that before. I mean it. She walked closer and stopped beside him. You did not know who I was. Neither did you. A small laugh escaped her. The first genuine laugh he had heard from her since they met. It lasted only a second, but it changed something in the room. The silence that followed felt lighter. Nearly a year later, Titan Reactor Station 7 looked very different. New safety systems lined the corridors. Inspection schedules were displayed openly across every department. Independent auditors moved through the facility with authority no executive could override. Most of the people responsible for the cover-up were gone. Some resigned. Others faced investigations. The details filled news feeds for months before the public moved on to something else. But a few people remembered. On a quiet afternoon, Ethan sat alone in the station cafeteria, wearing the same maintenance uniform he had always worn. The fabric was newer. The coffee was not. He stirred the cup absent-mindedly while reviewing work orders on a handheld tablet. The room buzzed with ordinary conversations. Workers discussing schedules. Engineers arguing over specifications. Life had returned. A shadow crossed the table. Ethan looked up. Lyra Voss stood there holding a tray. She wore a station director badge now. Her responsibilities covered half the facility. Yet she smiled exactly the same way she had in the tunnels. This seat taken? She asked. Ethan glanced around the nearly empty cafeteria. I think I can make room. She sat down. Neither of them mentioned investigations. Or executives. Or evidence. They talked about maintenance schedules. Cooling systems. A broken lift on Deck 4. Ordinary things. The kind of things people discuss when they finally have a future worth planning for. Outside the station windows, distant stars shimmered against the darkness. Inside, workers moved through another normal day. Lyra looked around the cafeteria for a moment before turning back to Ethan. You know, she said softly, when everyone else saw a problem to avoid, you saw a person. Ethan stared into his coffee for a second. Then he shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. Lyra smiled. Beyond the glass, starlight reflected across the station. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of them felt alone.